Representative Barbara Lee has a new proposal, a new resolution. It calls for the defunding of the Pentagon. She's actually proposing about $350 billion to the military budget by closing U.S. bases overseas, ending ongoing wars, ending certain weapons programs, and scrapping Space Force. So now, she said when she put this out in a statement, quote, redundant nuclear weapons, off-book spending accounts, and endless wars in the Middle East do not keep us safe, especially at a time when families across the country are struggling to pay the bills, including more than 16,000 families across the country that are struggling to pay the bills. We need to take that are on food stamps. We need to take a hard look at every dollar and reinvest it in people. It's time to cut weapons of war and prioritize the well-being of our troops, anti-poverty programs, public health initiatives, and diplomacy. Exactly. So I absolutely agree with her. So let's get into the details, right? So now this comes as the House of Representatives is starting to work on the next year's National Defense Authorization Act, the NDAA, right? Now, the NDAA, the Senate version of this, calls for $740 billion in military spending. Now, Senator Bernie Sanders has said, well, let's cut that by 10%. How about we cut it more? Sorry, Bernie, but look, this is some of the situations where I say Bernie was the compromise, right? Because he's like, hey, let's do a significant cut, 10%. No, me, I'm like 50%. Let's cut it more. let's slash this budget. You want to talk about defund? Let's defund the Pentagon. Now, Lee says this. We cannot continue to prioritize funding for a department known for its waste, fraud, and abuse. And so this is using conservative language. I love it because it's using their own framing against them. They always talk about how social programs are filled with waste, fraud, and abuse. So much waste, fraud, and abuse. Well, now, I mean, look, there were trillions of dollars that were wasted in Iraq and Afghanistan. Literally money going missing from pallets. You want to talk about waste, fraud, and abuse? Look into the military. Look into the defense contractors. That's where it's at. She says, she points out that they had failed to pass an audit. It's true. And says that especially when the money to protect national security is failing to protect our most vulnerable citizens, it doesn't even protect our troops, really. Remember, the lowest paid soldiers in E1, they get $19,000 a year. Disastrous. It's not going to the troops. It's going elsewhere. Now, let me give you the breakdown of what she intends to do. She intends to save $68 billion by eliminating the Overseas Contingency Operations account, saves $90 billion by shuttering 60% of U.S. military bases overseas. These are bases that really, at this point, we don't really need. $66 billion by ending funding for ongoing U.S. wars, including, again, Afghanistan, Iraq. And of course, we also have these wars in Yemen and other places across the world. She wants to save $57 billion by eliminating obsolete, excessive, and dangerous weapons. $38 billion by cutting military overhead by 15%. $26 billion by slashing private service contracting by 15%. $2.6 billion by dashing Trump's Space Force proposal. $18 billion by ending use it or lose it contract spending. $6 billion by freezing operations and maintenance budgets, and about $23 billion by cutting U.S. presence in Afghanistan by half. So, look, that's a decent amount of cuts. Again, $350 billion. That's about half. I'm in favor. Definitely. So now, Lee's office noted in a press release the Pentagon's budget for fiscal year 2020, $738 billion, was the largest on record and came at the expense of healthcare, education, infrastructure, and public health research. She said, for years, our government has failed to invest in programs that actually keep our country safe and healthy. By over-prioritizing the Pentagon and military solutions, Our country is drastically underprepared for any crisis that needs a non-military solution. I think a great example is right in front of us, coronavirus. I mean, we weren't prepared for coronavirus. We had a PPE shortage. We didn't have enough masks, and that's originally why the CDC was wary about saying recommending that regular people wear masks so that we can save it for medical professionals. Our hospitals, our states, our healthcare system, they weren't prepared for COVID-19, and we're not going to be prepared for the next pandemic. And so our country is also not prepared for other things, not just pandemics, but also climate change related natural disasters, stronger hurricanes, floods, droughts, and other natural disasters. But hey, guys, at least we got Space Force. Space Force. Pew pew lasers, except we don't even have those. Sad. But we do have lots of missiles, warships, and tanks that we don't really use. Look, a lot of this money, as I mentioned, it doesn't go to the troops. It goes into defense contractors, private industry. They lobby politicians. They spend lots and lots of money lobbying in order to keep that money flowing. So it's not really about defense. It's about really feeding the military-industrial complex. And unfortunately, the problem with that is that we have state governments now that rely on these defense contractor industries. And that's bad. That really has an impact on state economies. There's lots and lots of jobs, right? They have jobs that are tied to making weapons of war. And in order to justify making more weapons of war, to sustain those jobs and to also help with CEO executive pay, we have to have more wars. Got to use them, right? Can't just sit there and make weapons that nobody's using. And so that means endless war. This is actually capitalism. This is destruction for jobs and profit. And Barbara Lee is right. We gotta stop this. We gotta put a stop to it. Cutting the Pentagon budget is the first step, obviously, but we have to end the military-industrial complex. We have to stop building bombs and start building bridges. I mean, we have to invest in our own people. We have to invest in infrastructure. And more importantly, we have to stop bombing people overseas while our country literally falls apart. And that's the issue. There should not be an incentive for endless warfare. And look, hopefully more people are going to be able to see that is, that we don't need this endless warfare. That I know that a lot of us are on the left specifically, and even some on the right are pretty war weary at this point. Even Donald Trump says, I'm going to end the war. Every president says, I'm going to end the wars. I'm going to end the wars. And of course, they never do. But because this is big business, this is gigantic, chunks of spending, of money, of jobs. And nobody living in those districts wants to give up that money because then it hurts their local economies. And so there has to be just a huge change. And not only the culture, of America and the popular opinion, but also people demonstrating in the streets about it. More anti-war protests, more anti-government spending on military measures, on wars and missiles and weapons and all that stuff. It's going to take that before we actually change, before Congress will even consider doing any sort of cuts. But I at least, I give Lee credit for trying, because I mean, something has to be done. We have to trim this budget. We have to reduce our war budget and also reduce and eliminate. We have to get out of these endless wars, and we have to stop this. We just have to stop this and start investing back in ourselves, into building up a better world instead of tearing down everyone else's. Hey guys, hopefully you enjoyed that free video. Now I'm going to have to ask you a favor. Between the demonetization and the YouTube algorithm messing around with view counts, etc., we're having a hard time adjusting to the new YouTube reality, which is where you guys come in. See, we have a patreon.com/TYTNation set up to help us rely on you guys, the viewers, instead of big corporate ads. Look, You know the show. You know how I'm not in favor of big corporations anyway. So help us transition away from relying on the ad model to pay the bills and sign up to be a patron, patreon.com/TYTNation. That goes a long way to help us keep the lights on. And you guys will know that you're supporting independent progressive media.